Today we're going to take a look at the 2022 Honda CBR600RR. We'll talk about where this 600cc super sport bike fits into Honda's current sport bike lineup, and we'll dive into its specs and features so you can see why this CBR demands a premium over models that only have one R at the end of their name. Plus, we'll start it up and show you what it sounds like, and a lot more as we cover everything you need to know about Honda's baddest CBR. Well, the baddest if we remove its 1000cc siblings with 2 and 3 R's at the end of their name. But first, if you guys find any info in this video helpful, please take a second and hit the like button. Liking the video and commenting below on what you think about this CBR and so on really helps with growing this channel through YouTube's algorithm, which in return helps me create more videos, and I really appreciate the help. So first up, where does the CBR600RR fit into Honda's current CBR lineup? The number one thing to pay attention to with Honda CBR models is how many R's there are after its engine size, and that gives you a glimpse into how hardcore they are. If they have just one R, I would call them your typical sport bike for the street, which is a very simplified explanation, but we're knocking these out quickly. And once we start to add in another R, they've received a lot more money spent in R&D to be more performance oriented with better components all around and more horsepower, because those bikes are, or in some cases were, raced by Honda. Then you have the latest versions of the top dog with even more R's being thrown in the mix than ever before, and by 2030 we'll not only have CBR triple R bikes, but quadruple R too. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's jump into some more info on this CBR, a bike that holds a very sweet spot in my heart as I've owned a few spanning across different generations over the years. Now, do you have any options when buying this bike? The only option you have comes down to whether or not you want standard brakes or Honda's anti-lock braking system, ABS. If you opt for the standard model, its MSRP comes in at $11,999, and the ABS model will bump you up to $12,999, and technically it has CABS, but we'll dive more into that shortly. Sadly, no color options yet again, but I do have to say the Grand Prix red looks killer as always, even though I may be a little biased when it comes to red. Next up, let's get into the chassis and suspension. This bike's aluminum twin spar frame utilizes fine die-cast technology to help it be as small and light as possible. This manufacturing technique helped to create an organically formed structure that offers an optimal balance of lightweight and rigidity. For example, the prior generation's frame consisted of 11 welded up sections, while this only has 4, and we could go on for 20 minutes about the intricacies behind it all, but it helped shave off more than 1.1 pounds while being stronger, slimmer, and just an overall more compact package. When it comes to suspension, up front you have an inverted show-up big piston fork with spring preload, rebound, and compression damping adjustability that brings in 4.3 inches of travel. Compared to the previous fork used, this setup has a larger diameter piston, resulting in a 3.5 times larger pressure-bearing area, which ensures a more precise damping force, helping to bring in a more comfortable ride as well as greater stability when you're hard on the brakes. In the rear, you have Honda's Unit ProLink rear suspension design with spring preload, rebound, and compression damping adjustability as well, bringing in 5.1 inches of travel. They also feature Honda's HMAS, which stands for Honda Multi-Action System. In short, it's a design their engineers concocted to employ smaller diameter pistons to keep oil velocity high for improved damping characteristics and to offer an expanded range of adjustability in the suspension. Then on the brake side of things, up front you have floating 310mm rotors paired up with radial mounted 4-piston calipers, and in the rear you have a single 220mm disc paired up with a tiny single piston caliper. Now if you opt for ABS, like the model we're looking at today, it's not like a normal ABS setup, but instead you get Honda's CABS, which means Combined Anti-Lock Braking System. Now I don't want to bore some of you with a detailed explanation on how that works, so I'll throw some text up on the screen breaking it down, no pun intended, for those that would like to learn more about how it works. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of it, but some people absolutely love it. It is something to keep in mind though, as some people think it's a standard ABS design. And besides glancing at the rotors, seeing the rear shock have a remote reservoir like this is a telltale sign it's an ABS model, because Honda had to move some things around in 2009 because of the rear brake unit being stashed here when they added this option. And those brakes are helping slow down your typical sized 17-inch aluminum hollow section wheels up front and in the back. This 12-spoke design replaced the old 3-spoke design in 2013, robbing the design off the CBR600RR, and needless to say, it looks 1,000 times better. Now when it comes to rubber, they're wrapped with the common 120/70 up front and, you guessed it, a 180/55 in the rear. And next up, let's geek out on the engine and drivetrain. You're looking at a compact dual overhead cam 16 valve 599cc liquid cooled inline 4-cylinder engine with a 12:2-to-1 compression ratio that's pumping out 118 horsepower at 13,500 RPM and 48 foot-pounds of torque at 11,250 RPM. Those power levels won't blow your mind if you're used to leader bikes, but it's more than what 99% of us can handle in the twisties, where this bike belongs. And here's an example of its acceleration in a straight line from one of my trips to the 8th mile drag strip. And you've got 40mm throttle bodies sucking in air that's delivered via the ram air intake up front that's made from polypropylene and fiberglass that bridges the gap between the steering head and the engine, which also supports the front fairing and headlights, helping save some weight. Then you have two Denso 12-hole fuel injectors per cylinder, and below 25% throttle, only the lower injectors operate, and once you exceed that mark and spin the engine past 4,800 RPM, the upper injectors come into play. You've got forged pistons, and the cylinder head has angle valve insets to improve airflow, and 2 springs per intake valve and 1 spring per exhaust valve for the best possible performance while she's screaming high up in the RPMs. Now we could really geek out on this engine and talk about it for another 10 to 20 minutes, but my analytics show a lot of you click off the video when that happens, so we'll try to keep moving along and not focus too much on the stuff that very few of you care about. And helping you put that power to the ground is a close ratio 6-speed transmission that is like butter, paired up with a quick shifter, and you'll love it even more, trust me. This engine has largely been unchanged since 2007, aside from the minor updates in 2013, and for good reason. It's bulletproof, so much so that they use this engine exclusively for the Moto2 race series for years. And I've put more than 40,000 miles on the 07 Plus generation's engine, and I've never had to do anything more than normal maintenance, and I beat the absolute piss out of them. I didn't use them to commute. All of my miles were either playing in the mountains at high RPMs for extended periods of time, drag racing, or it was track time at Road Atlanta, Jennings, or Little Tally, and they never skipped a beat. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I'd like to see Honda throw a small horsepower bump at it. Well, not Honda's definition of small, as that'd be a 1 horsepower increase, but maybe 5 to 10. I know that's asking a lot, but I'm sure most of you wouldn't object. Now let's bounce around the bike and touch on a few different things. Storage. Do you have any? Well, no. No, you don't. I mean, technically, you could call this storage under the passenger seat, but the only thing you'll be storing in there is a pack of gum and maybe your registration papers. That's the only real downfall, in my opinion, to the undertail exhaust. It kills any chance of having some depth in the tail to store stuff. And how about fancy electronics with different modes and rider aids, stuff that makes the bike easier to ride? Nope, to all of the above. This bike is still analog in that you have a throttle cable instead of drive-by-wire like most nowadays, and depending on which side of the fence you're on, that could be a good or a bad thing. However, it does have Honda's electronic steering damper, also known as HESD. Most dampers only sense handlebar deflection speed, whereas this setup also detects the bike's speed too and adjusts damping proportionally, which in return helps maintain low speed maneuverability. Now, I won't bore you guys with measurement specs, but I'll throw some up on the screen right now that a few of you may care to see, and when it comes to seat height, it's right at 32.3 inches. You have a 4.8 gallon fuel tank, and unlike a lot of sport bikes back in the day when this gauge cluster was originally designed, it actually has a fuel gauge instead of just having a dummy light to let you know when you're fixing to run out of fuel. It may seem like a minor thing, but trust me, if you're used to not having a fuel gauge, it's life-changing when you have one. Now, the ABS system we mentioned earlier, how does that affect its overall curb weight? You go from 410 pounds on the standard model up to 434 pounds for this ABS model. Most people buying these aren't racing them, so it's not really a big deal, but 24 pounds on a bike like this is a lot. Now, let's start it up and show you guys what it sounds like in stock form, and then we'll come back for a few more things. And that's the 2022 Honda CBR600RR. What did Honda change for 2022 on it? The only changes come in the way of pricing with a $100 increase for this year, which leads me to my question for you guys. What do you think about the CBR600RR as a whole? And what do you think Honda needs to change next to bring this platform to the next level? As, let's face it, she has become dated. As much as I love this bike and the platform in general, it needs some love. As a whole, this bike is very close to the groundbreaking model that they released back in 2007, when they pulled out all the stops to build the baddest 600 supersport bike on the planet. They threw a few minor tweaks at it in 2009 and then again in 2013 with the forks, wheels, small engine and cosmetic updates, and that's about it. And here we are in 2022 with the same bike as 2013. And it's very close to the same bike that dates back to 2007. I know Honda is trying to run a business, and if something isn't selling well, there's no point in investing money into changes and so on. Plus, it's not like we see Honda out racing these like they did back in the 600 Supersport bikes' heyday. It's almost like we're watching the end of an era with these high-strung 600 class bikes, and being someone that enjoys a 600 a lot more than the leader bike, I don't like it. But technically the platform isn't 100% dead just yet, as Honda redesigned this 600RR platform, but only Japan was blessed with its release back in 2020. Now it's not an entirely new bike from the ground up, as they still carried over a lot of parts that date back to the original 2007, but they threw the most significant upgrades at it since the major overhaul in 2007, and it's now more in line with other manufacturers' 600s here in the States when you compare them against our 10-year-old bike that we get here in the US. I'd love to talk with the people pulling the strings at American Honda and find out the real reason as to why the Japanese spec bike isn't imported. Is it because of lackluster sales or what? I think it'd be an interesting conversation, but there are a million different questions I'd love to ask, and of course, I think they're all interesting topics. Now I could ramble on for another 20 minutes about this bike and its nitty-gritty details, but that's a wrap for this one. And if you'd like to learn more about it, check out HondaProKevin.com, and I'll have a link down below. Thanks again for watching and supporting all of this. I really appreciate it, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. But first, I want to take a quick second and say thank you to Southern Honda Powersports for opening their doors to me and allowing me to come pick through their inventory for these videos. They are a massive Honda Powersports dealer here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with tons of inventory from new Hondas to used Harleys and everything in between that they sell to people from all over the USA. So check out the link in the description below and head over to their website to see if they can save you some money on your next toy.